ask anyone who isn't presenting to kindly mute your microphone. If you have questions about something that is presented today, please save them until the end. When it is time, I will ask you to raise your hand by typing your name into the chat section. Thank you. I would now like to invite Ben Poynton, U of T's Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act officer, as well as Chris Sabatinos, Web Accessibility Specialist, and Ira Cohen, Supervisor, Audiovisual and Staging Services, Hart House, to begin today's presentation.
Hello, everybody, and thank you, Sarah, for that introduction. If we can move on to the next slide, I think my friend Carlo is helping us. And then on, so today we're going to be talking about accessible online events, making all spaces accessible. My name is Ben. I'm the university's AODA, Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act officer. In that role, I am responsible for ensuring the university is meeting all requirements under the legislation, which is a broad sort of sweeping piece of legislation and has various different standards to which the university needs to meet. I'm also involved in ensuring the university can be as accessible as possible and how we can move beyond compliance and consider other aspects like the Human Rights Code and our own statement of commitment regarding persons with disabilities. If I may, I think I might let Ira and Chris sort of introduce themselves as they get onto the next section, because we've got a lot to get through. So I want to make sure that we all sort of move through each section and then they can introduce themselves as they move on. We're going to sort of take control over different parts, and the next slide will help us to show what that looks like. So next slide, please. So today our agenda is we're going to sort of define what accessibility is and what an accessible online event would look like. We're going to look at accessibility and online event tools, practical applications, and then we're asking to see if we can find if you can share with us your own best practices that you're looking into. I just want to begin by thanking Sarah, Nini, and all those from the President's Office engaged in putting these sessions on. I was delighted to have this proposal accepted to put on a session. I think it's very important for us all to understand how we can maintain our accessibility in these new environments. I also just want to thank Chris and Ira for joining me today, and I also want to thank Hart House for graciously lending us Ira for this session. Hart House has been doing some great work in respect of hosting all accessible events, online or otherwise. And I also want to just welcome you all and acknowledge what it took for you to come here today. We're all juggling with massive changes in our environments. We all have new anxieties in a time where our support networks are very fragmented. As some of us maybe have accessibility needs that are not being met, are more complicated to be met in this environment. So I'm thankful that you joined us all today and that you've taken the time out to learn as much as you can about this topic. We know how difficult it is based on what our community are telling us, based on what the Canada Mental Health Research Organisation tells us, that 24% of Canadians' mental health they've reported it has got worse since the onset of COVID, and specifically working from home has been difficult. So I know that we're struggling to connect, and hopefully today we can find time to connect. And I know this personally because I've been doing some cognitive behavioural therapy over the past few years, and my coping strategies have changed. So I'm delighted to meet with you today and to talk through this matter and try to find and make accessible events online as much as possible. Additionally, next week is National Accessibility Week in Canada. So the goal of that is to change the way we think, talk and act about inclusion and accessibility. So I'm looking forward to starting a week early with you on how we can meet the goal of National Accessibility Week. Next slide, please. So as with all events, and there's nothing different about being online, we all reside on traditional territory of First Nations people. So we still need to acknowledge the spaces that we're on and to thank and acknowledge Indigenous folks for the land in which we reside. So the University of Toronto, we wish to acknowledge that this land is on which it operates. For thousands of years, it has been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and most recently the Mississaugas of the Credit River. Today, this meeting place is still home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we're grateful to have the opportunity to work on this land. That takes on new and increasing significance for me in this time where communities are more fragmented and communities are struggling to come together on traditional land. And we also, what we know about how COVID-19 is affecting historically disenfranchised and disadvantaged communities across the country. And especially worrying is the effect that this could maybe have on Indigenous communities' capacity to keep their knowledge keepers with them so that they can continue to pass down the knowledge that they have. So I think it's ever more important for us to acknowledge the land and acknowledge what First Nations are going through and what they have given to us, and acknowledge that. Next slide, please. I also wanted to make sure we're all aware that we all have a shared responsibility to ensure for this space to be accessible. And I understand that access is a shared responsibility. So between everyone in this space, so we will strive, Ira, Chris and I will strive to create an accessible space that reduces the need for you to disclose something to us, whether a disability or impairment, for the purposes of gaining accommodation. And in doing this together, we strive to welcome disability and the changes it brings into our space. So is there anything about this space, this is a question to you now, is there anything about the space that might affect, that we should address now? Is there anything any other access needs that might affect your participation in this session today that we should address? One thing I'd like to ask everybody is just to remind you if you can please mute your microphones. That is especially important for those who need to be able to concentrate on hearing our voices as one, and the distractions that it may cause in the event that there are distracting noises throughout. So please do your best to try to keep those microphones off so that we can reduce distraction. So next slide, please. So we just wanted to do a quick check-in with you to begin with, to try to get a sense of some of the tools that you're using. This is very helpful to us, and as we move through the session, to make sure that we have got this correct. I'm going to ask Chris to put this into the poll function for us now using the chat function. But what systems are you using at the moment? Are you using MS Teams, Zoom, something like Blackboard Collaborate, or any others? I'm just waiting on the to be populated, and then hopefully we can see what you let us know. Thank you for posting those who are doing so. Okay. I think we can eschew the poll for now, but it seems like we have a pretty sort of large consensus around Zoom's Teams. One extra one that has been put in there is MS Live, which is very interesting, and I think there's been sessions on that across the institution, so we'll see how that looks. But I think broadly speaking, we're covering Teams and Zoom, and then we will end up speaking in broad strokes about some of the things you can do no matter what the platform you're using. So thank you for offering up your opinion on that. Next, we're going to have an accessibility quiz, and hopefully this works. I'm going to post a little form in here, which is going to give you a little quiz on on these different questions. So this will lead you off to a different section. And I'm just going to track this. If you have any issues getting to this particular form, let me know, but hopefully you can get in it and you can start to take a look at those questions and answer them in live. Let me know if you have any issues with it at all. Okay. So we're starting to see some results come in. So on the first question, most people answered correctly that accessibility requirements don't only apply to our physical spaces. So well done. And then for the second question, if I follow all the requirements of the AOD, I don't need to do anything else. Most people answered false, which is excellent. One person answered true, which is okay. And then who benefits from online events? I think you've all been taking my training before, which is great, because your answer was everyone, which is generally correct. But I think that also, thankfully, someone had mentioned here too that everyone who participates, particularly those who request mobility aids, I think it's important to note that while we can address barriers for those with disabilities, and that therefore reduces barriers for everyone else to participate, we need to make sure that we are ensuring everyone is included, particularly those who have historically been greeted with barriers when they have historically tried to access what we're doing. So thank you, and well done to everyone. Next slide, please. So I'm just going to talk briefly about accessibility at U of T. The three sections we're going through is, what does accessibility mean? And therefore, what does it mean in the online environment? The second piece will be looking at some of the platforms that we know that we're already using, and what are some of the inherent accessibility features or ways in which you can get around it to make it accessible. And then the third thing that Ira will be talking about is, how can we use the practical applications of those systems and everything else around them to actually practically apply accessibility in those spaces. Next slide, please. So what is accessibility? I think from our perspective, it depends. It's both a legal requirement and a response to requests and a shared responsibility. We're going to go through those things in the next few slides. Next slide, please. So the legal requirement, as many of you already are aware, is that we have provincial laws within Ontario that protect and enshrine the legal rights of persons with disabilities to access and also to be free from discrimination and harassment. So that they have the AODA, the Human Rights Code of Ontario, and University of Toronto policies in our specific context. And then these are all sort of compliance and complaint-driven processes. So I'm just going to speak to the little graphic I have here. So we have kind of something that looks a little bit like a house. We have the Ontario Human Rights Code, which is the bedrock. And then on top of that, the roof of this house is the Integrated Accessibility Standards Regulation, which has been developed through the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act. And under those general requirements, we have information and communication standards, employment standards, transportation standards, design of public spaces standards, and customer service standards. So institutions need to both make sure they're following their obligations under the Human Rights Code to create a space that is free from discrimination, ensure that there are accommodation processes for both employees and service users, for example, students. And then we're also required to make sure we're meeting all these newish standards that also help to address barriers to participation for persons with disabilities. This is compliance and complaint driven, these processes essentially. So we have to look at what the law says, make sure we do it, and then say that we've done it. And then under the code, people can assert their rights as and when we haven't done it, if we haven't accommodated appropriately. So in most cases, it's dependent on the notification of needs. So individuals need to tell us, and we're going to talk about this a little bit in how we extrapolate this into online events. But oftentimes we'll see things like, if you require accommodation for reasons related to disability, please contact us. So some of this is dependent on notification of needs. And one quote from the customer service standard I've put here is that provision of services must be integrated unless an alternative measure is necessary to enable a person with a disability to obtain, use, or benefit from the service. So one key piece is that we need to also think about how we can integrate things, not necessarily have something separate. And I think that leads us more towards what we're talking about in the next slide, please. So one of the next pieces I think we also need to think about is that it's a shared responsibility. So when we think about that, we can think about, some of you may already be aware of the different kind of models of disability, and there's some debate around the usefulness of talking about those different models, but I think that it helps to get us to the beginning and starts us to think a little bit more about where the problem per se of disability resides. And so we often reside in a medical model where that notification of need needs to be made, and therefore an assessment is made on what the person needs based on the opinions of doctors and other healthcare professionals. And then someone is supplied with an accommodation, and that's very much on an individual basis, and it's addressing barriers on a one-by-one basis. I think that we can maybe start to see disability a little bit more as a social model, whereby it's not necessarily that the person needs something to change about them, it's that we need to change something about society and to change interaction between the person and society in order to make sure that the barrier is addressed and the person's disability doesn't affect their access And that necessarily means that we all have a responsibility. And I love this quote from the Reframing Difference podcast that Harthouse University did a couple of years ago with Kate Welsh, the well-known disability community activist. And Madeline, with whom she spoke, with whom Kate spoke, noted that accessibility is a dialogue, not just a legal obligation. And I think the importance of that dialogue piece is for us to look in society and to look from what people with disabilities are telling us about what the barriers they face are and how we can incorporate those things into how we provide our services, events, and everything else, make sure that they are accessible. So it's not simply around following the law, which is very important. It's also about what can we learn from this dialogue to make sure that we are making the space to be as accessible as possible. I'm just going to pause for a moment to make sure that everyone can please mute the microphones. I'm hearing a bit of interference on my side. Hopefully it's just me, but if everyone else does, apologies for that, but can we just please make sure we're muting out, turning off our microphones, please. Next slide. So when I apply this in the, thank you, Francoise, for letting us know there is some interference. One way of looking at this in all spaces, we sort of mentioned earlier in the little quiz for you, is that we're alluding to the fact that accessibility applies in all spaces, whether it's physical spaces, whether it's online spaces, whether it's anywhere else we can think of, accessibility applies. And so we need to think about what we just mentioned around accessibility and how that can apply in an online event. So I just put together some sort of thoughts, and in what Chris and Ira are going to talk to you about is they're going to dive deeper into how these things can be actioned and how we can try to address these barriers and support these aspects of accessible online events. But I think there's 5 key things that we need to think about. Trying to provide captions where possible, or using systems that support provision of captions. So MS Teams has the automatic caption function. And again, Ira and Chris will go into more detail around what that looks like in different platforms, but it means that individuals who experience hearing loss or other information processes can perceive what's happening. It also means that anyone for whom English is a second language or comprehension otherwise through English auditory processing doesn't work for them, they're able then to use the captions where possible. So I feel like it's a universal design piece, and universal design means that everybody can access it, and not simply those with hearing loss, it's everyone who can access it too. One key piece here is that we need to make the programs that we're using simple to use and ensure that distractions are removed. So at the beginning of the session and as part of the registration materials you received, we provided you with information on how to use MS Teams. And it's very important that people are orientated to the systems they're using, how they can interact with it, and the expectations that are placed upon them in order to do that. There's a lot of assumptions that are being made around who can do what in different environments, and that everyone just sort of knows how this stuff works and will be able to interact with it. For all kinds of reasons, whether they're access or other reasons, oftentimes folks are sort of struggling with these new systems, how they work, and how they can actually participate fully. So it's important to provide instructions on how to use the platforms, and also to make sure that everyone is aware of their own shared responsibility to ensure those distractions are removed. And also to make sure people feel comfortable that they don't have to share their screen, or they don't have to always be on microphone, but they can also participate in different means. That moves us on to the third section here, where we need to provide multiple means of participation. So people are given multiple means of engaging in the topics, multiple means of participating and interacting with you. This is a very different environment, but as I think we're learning, it's actually creating access in some spaces where lots of people who didn't interact with us before as an institution are now joining us because of the comfort level that they now have with using these online interactive tools. Before this session, I was just on a call actually with a committee at the government to develop new education standards under the AODA, and one of the things that has been reported by various institutions is that students who identify as being on the autism spectrum or identify as being autistic have stated that this has created an environment that does work a bit better for them and they're preferring being online. However, we also know that it also creates barriers for other people who maybe can't look at screens all day, or we're choosing platforms that don't work with all assistive technologies. So We need to make sure we're providing those multiple means of participation, including using the chat function for those who can't use the audio for those who can't use the chat function, and using alternatives where the main platform does not work for all for allowing people to participate. For example, email questions, and we received some email questions in advance of this session. Ensuring all content, including external, is accessible. So it's key when you're using external tools, you're sending people to polls. There's been sort of proliferation of all these different kinds of external tools that we're often using, just to make sure that those are accessible and that access information is provided. So if you've done work to make the event accessible online, tell people what you've done so that they can feel comfortable participating, and then let them know how they can ask you, how they can ask if they can have any accommodations provided beyond that. Next slide, please. So now we're on to Chris, and I look forward to questions at the end. Thank you.
Thanks, Ben. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Chris Sabatinos. I'm the Web Accessibility Specialist for the AODA office. And today I would like to talk to you, I suppose, about a couple of things about three of the major platforms that we mentioned already in the poll, and hope to answer a couple of the differentiating questions between the actual platforms. Next slide, please. So we already mentioned previously Zoom, Blackboard, Collaborate. That's the purple icon in the middle with the two chevrons, and Microsoft Teams, which we are of course using now. Next slide, please. So a couple of things about this is, one, the subtitle on the previous slide was that some are institutionally supported, some are not. And this is going to be one of those factors. Sometimes accessibility isn't necessarily just about the actual technical aspects, or at least the technical aspects can lead into social issues. So I think by now probably everybody's heard that Zoom had a little bit of an issue security-wise not too long ago. However, the institutionally supported tools, I just want to mention, have been vetted by ITS in one capacity or another to at least assure some sort of a baseline for us. So if security is one of those accessibility concerns among your community, then you probably want to stick to those. So out of all the platforms, they have a lot of things in common. And in fact, I think you'll find that a lot of them are racing towards feature parity as we go along. So for one, they also provide mobile apps, which is very good because in some cases where a full desktop or laptop is not available to people, almost everybody these days has a mobile. So almost all of them support a dial-in service. So a couple people have joined us via dial-in today for this Teams meeting, and I did confirm that Zoom has a dial-in service, and Blackboard Collaborate I know to have one as well. So they all have specialized hotkeys for better navigation. So some of you may be more familiar with this than others, but on a day-to-day basis, there's a lot of hotkeys which are used in your software. Some people might be familiar with like Control-C, Control-V, Control-Z for average like day-to-day word functions. However, there's sort of analogs for those things within these spaces. So all of these do support hotkeys. So they all have support. They all support audio, video, and application/screen sharing. So it's very handy for presentations like this, where you end up having a slide deck that you need to share, or if you want to share some other application or a browser window, that's possible in all places. So they all have a supported chat, which of course is where people cannot necessarily contribute auditorily. They can contribute textually to the chat. It also assists in the facilitation of these meetings, as we've done already. They have user interaction features like raising a hand. If people sort of mouse over their window in Teams at the moment, if you are using the application client, you are using an updated version. Microsoft recently added this themselves. You have a little raise your hand icon. I'm going to pop my hand up here at the moment and lower it to facilitate better user interaction. However, mileage will vary. We're going to get into that in a little bit. Sessions on all three platforms can be, of course, recorded for later viewing, and they can, all these have been tested to a degree with common assistive technology like screen readers. And in that group, I would probably take the big three at the moment, which are JAWS, NVDA, and VoiceOver on Mac. Next slide, please. So the audience is going to determine a lot of what you want, and the thesis behind the statement largely is that comfort with a technology will drive better engagement. If this is somebody's first time use of a particular platform, they're going to spend a lot of time playing with the bits and bobs, all the buttons, in order to get things working right. So, and to that, there are a couple of considerations. One, the current ubiquity of Zoom is incredible. I've had Zoom meetings for just about everything in the past month and a half, and I'm sure a lot of other people here have too. So, on the other hand, students who have been doing most of their coursework with Q or Canvas, which is the technology which powers that, has attached to it Blackboard Collaborate Ultra as its meeting software. And so they might already be more familiar with that if that's your audience. And staff, aside from Zoom meetings, have been probably relying fairly heavily on MS Teams as the pandemic situation has worn on. So despite the common features, like things like keyboard shortcuts, layouts, focus order, so those things might actually vary. And focus order, if you're not aware, is something that becomes very important to people who do not have use of a mouse or a pointer at all, people who rely on keyboard navigation. So those people often tend to use the arrow keys, and they tend to use the tab key in order to navigate through various different features on the site. At the moment, if you have, without pressing spacebar or enter, I will caution you, just have a play around for a second, try pressing tab on your keyboard if you are joining us from a desktop or a laptop, just to sort of see how that tabs through. So, like I said, familiarity with the interface supports better engagement. And if familiarity is an issue, then the points about supplying documentation or a guide as to what to expect to your users is all that much more important. Next slide, please. So let's start off with Zoom. Not supported, at least not institutionally supported. Some divisions may have already gotten a license for it, but on a grand university-wide scale, it is not something that we have a license for, and it has not been vetted in a full capacity. So couple neat things about it. One, as far as Ben's point regarding captions, it can be provided two ways in Zoom. One is that one of the users within the meeting can be assigned as a captioner, and that person can have their audio and video disabled and type along. And this can provide actually very good results, especially if the person's a good typist and a good listener. The other options too is Zoom has a marketplace, and from that marketplace and also other third-party channels, you can hook in automated captioning services to them. So one little caution though is that both Zoom itself, unless you're keeping under a certain time limit, and these captioning services are paid services. They are not free. So have a feeling like autocorrect did something for me here. Limited in-browser attendance. So very sorry, not sure what I meant by that bullet. So the user interface is quite simple on Zoom. For people who have already used Zoom. Oh, sorry, one second. Laura, I'll try to do my best to answer your question during the question period at the end, but thank you very much for posting that. So regarding the interface, it's very simple. There's out of the box, there's not a ton of options to confuse people. So, and from what I know, from anecdotal evidence from friends of mine within the blind community, it works quite well with assistive technologies. One other really neat benefit, and this is a growing thing within user interaction, is the keyboard shortcuts are fully customizable. So for those people who find that they're used to different keyboard shortcuts, they can change them by themselves. That's fine. Next slide, please. Blackboard Collaborate Ultra. It's supported, like I said, it's through Q. And so I'm just going to compare the points on this. Is captions are available by assigning a person as a live captioner. So again, similar to Zoom in this regard. However, there is no sort of automated captioning available. It has a very rich in-browser experience. This is one of the ones, actually, I would like to say that Zoom and MS Teams to this point have limited in-browser experiences. You will not get the full-fat version. However, Collaborate's quite the opposite and provides robust feedback mechanisms for interactive sessions. So aside from just the hand raising, there is a lot more baked in, which, because it is a tool that is designed for instruction, there's a lot more polling features, etc., which are already in there, which can be a plus and can be a minus. The interface can be a little bit more cumbersome as a result and requires, I think, a little bit more getting used to on behalf of the participants. And browser type and version can disrupt functionality. There have been a number of cases where, depending on the version of Chrome or Firefox you're using, audio might be problematic, video might be problematic, so requires a little bit of extra headway for a user to accommodate or become accustomed to it. And one neat little thing that it does do, which I think is available in Zoom too, but anonymity, particularly in post-processing, is very easy to configure. So if anonymity is an important accessibility or comfort concern for any of your participants, it's very easy to do in Blackboard Collaborate. Next slide, please. And now to the software that we are currently using, and Microsoft Teams. And it comes in two flavors, meetings and live events. Meetings is geared towards more heavily interactive sessions, and live events is something where you're going to have a lot of people and you want a little more limited interaction, but higher production values. Now, one big benefit that you can do, probably, I'm going to preface this, depending on the version of MS Teams you are using, if you look in the little 3 dots in your session, you can possibly, you have an option to turn on live captions, and this is automated through Microsoft servers. So out of all the services we've discussed so far, this is the only one that provides out-of-the-box closed captioning. I am sure that these courses that are being, put together are at the very least, I'm sorry, if you have your microphone on, can you please mute your mic? Thank you. So that's a big plus in my books. I've been providing webinars myself, and this is the one that I like to use for that very reason alone. It provides a limited in-browser attendance, and so you can sort of gather you can gather attendance and whatnot, download lists. That's very handy. Meetings is geared towards, like I said, intense participation. Live events is geared towards presentation. And so for those reasons alone, live events I would consider a little bit more of a simple user interface. Meetings, on the other hand, has a couple of other things. However, it is easy to use. If we have time at the end, I can give a demo. Meetings can handle up to 250 per session, and live events can handle up to 10,000 people per session. Next slide, please. And I'd like to now pass the mic over to Ira. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thanks, Chris. Hey, everybody. Can you all hear me? Your mics are off, so I'm going to assume you can. My name is Ira Cohen. I'm the supervisor of audiovisual services at Hart House. I want to thank Ben for inviting me to speak about the practical approach to actually implementing a lot of these accessibility features within a virtual event setting. Before I start, I do want to say, though, while I'm speaking, this effort has really been a collaborative approach across all of Hard House through our accessibility team, student program advisors, and events department. So I want to give a shout out to them for all the work we've done over the past couple of months. My job is mainly to coordinate all our technical operations for virtual events. For the better part of the last 5 years, we've been using Zoom quite successfully, mostly because we have a set of standards and guidelines in place which manage it very securely and smoothly. But like Chris said, there is really a time and place for each one of the application. And before going into it, it's very important that while we can't really be in a physical space together right now, I think the need for connection has never been more vital. And I'm going to outline how to implement accessibility needs in a virtual event setting within your organization by taking a very proactive approach. So next slide, please. So the first aspect to consider before starting anything is, what do you want the session to really be? What is the nature of what you want to present? Is it a meeting where most, if not all, participants are on screen, taking a more collaborative and interactive approach? Or could it be a webinar, which is more of a broadcast presentation, one-way type approach, which is kind of like what we're doing here? Once the nature of your event kind of takes shape, it will definitely dictate what the accessibility and security needs you should be implementing. So this can be considered through knowing what the level of audience engagement is going to be, what the level of viewing, audio, and just how you want the structure and the flow of your event to go. The type of event will also allow you to share and communicate guidelines for participants on how to join your meeting, being mindful of being on camera, your mic being muted or unmuted, using the chat appropriately, taking advantage of virtual hand raising, Q&A, and as well as the structure of your event may dictate specific needs as well. For instance, you may need to draw specific attention to an element of the meeting at any given time, like a PowerPoint or a breakout room or a chat. So the type of event will really dictate what needs you need to implement. And will your event be registration based or more of a drop-in type event? How do you handle the communication and guidelines for each type of scenario? So for instance, you can use registration as a tool for asking questions to your participants ahead of time, really getting to know what their needs actually are going to be, and making sure they have the ability to write in so you can address that. And if it's more of a drop-in type event, using public forums or email lists or your social media to indicate a point of contact for disclosing meeting details, and coordinate the needs and requests and questions of your participants ahead of time. And again, all of this will determine what the best application for you, what is the best application for you to use. And it's really important that you really put the needs of the event or your session and the participants first in order to determine what your best choice will be. Next slide, please. So now we're going to talk about how to actually go about implementing some of these services that Chris and Ben spoke about within the session itself. As Chris went over, many of these softwares have their own features and quirks, and it's really about knowing what each one can do for you. And the goal is to show how these practices can potentially be shared across the board. That's not necessarily platform specific, but it's more of a set of guidelines and tools that you can use to implement these. So the first service we're going to talk about is CART, so supporting for live captioning. And some of the ways you can implement these are to hire a CART service provider as you would in any physical space. So typically you would have a remote setting for a CART provider that will be providing captioning for a physical event. But in this case, you'll be inviting them to join the actual session as a participant. you can have their video and audio turned off, and you can assign them to type live, as some programs allow you to do so. It'll alleviate any pressure for any host, coordinator, or participant to complete, so you can really just focus on the needs of your guests. Some have integration with third-party software, so you should really do your research ahead of time. And third-party tokens, like Zoom does have that aspect in it, and it does have integration with third-party apps. So really do your research ahead of time on what would be the best way to go about live captioning. As Chris also mentioned, Microsoft Live takes from their database and does live captioning. So you may want to test that ahead of time for sure. But again, it's all about what your needs are. And you also want to ensure your provider sends a post-event transcript. So this will capture anything that may be missed on screen, like if you have something that's being shared with your screen that you can't really necessarily see who's speaking. So you really want to get that transcript. The next aspect would be ASL or sign language interpreters. So a tip would be to always ensure the provider and their camera is on and visible throughout the session. Do a walkthrough ahead of the scheduled session to ensure optimal viewing. And if screen sharing or file sharing is in use and they cannot be on camera, talk to your participants ahead of time, indicate it that they may be off camera, and ensure a transcript will be provided. Next slide, please. So enhancing visual support is key to kind of a primary method of engagement within your session, and it can mean a variety of different things. So it includes ensuring that the platform has support for screen readers. You want to ensure that it is using the latest technology standards. It's often indicated in documentation website of the actual software itself as to what type of support screen readers have, the software have for screen readers. And getting back to your registration piece or having that point of contact for your event, if something like this maybe does come up, you want to maybe reach out to your guest and find out what type of screen reader they are using, and potentially work with them ahead of time to ensure whatever service you are providing is compatible with their screen reader. So really, it's all about communication and preparation ahead of time. And provide other options if it's not compatible, but again, should be done well in advance. And the next part would be to work with guests on visual layout. So again, another part of enhancing your visual experience and visual support. So, so for some guests who may, or participants who may have trouble viewing, don't necessarily need the event have a screen reader. You may want to take screenshots or do a mock session with instructions on how to access specific visual features of the session ahead of time, kind of like what we had at the beginning of this slide, where it gave you a bit of instructions on how to use your mic. But you can take that to a next level on actually having a practice session with a participant who has those needs to really work to ensure that their screen or their layout is optimal for them. Next slide, please. Oh, no, we'll stay on this one, sorry. Talk to text. So using the chat function can be extremely useful and act as a talk to text piece of technology. If you don't have the actual talk to text devices. So using the chat is really, really key and can act as sort of that mock talk to text experience. And a way that you can actually coordinate this is having a dedicated chat moderator, which would be extremely valuable to summarize what the presenter is saying or highlight specific areas that another presenter is clarifying. People can tend to zone out over a long period of time. So having the ability to follow a chat with that key highlights, but really assigning one of your moderators to handle the chat really acts as a secondary level of transcription for your event. It also ensures any live Q&A where maybe the audio is unmuted for a person or they're visible on screen for a given moment is fully captured. Now we'll go to the next slide. So part of my responsibilities have been to create a set of guidelines around security and best practices within our organization to ensure our meetings are not only secure, accessible, but also inclusive. Inclusivity is a really important aspect of accessibility and can sometimes go overlooked. So the following are some best practices and guidelines for you as the host to not only ensure your sessions run smoothly and securely, but again, inclusive as well. And I want to stress that these practices extend across all platforms. They're not married to any one particular software. They're not session specific. They can be applicable to any type of session, whether it's a meeting, webinar, presentation, whatever. So the first one would be to ensure participants are mindful of their meeting controls. Run down to start the event or in a document leading up about all your audio, video, chat, Q&A, polling features, and get everybody on the same page to start. Ensuring all participants know the flow of the event and process to join the session, whether you're going to be having a waiting room, sending an agenda ahead of time, who is presenting, anticipate those key elements to make it easier for them to view and participate as well as engage. Laying out the session etiquette ahead of time is really important. From the start, you want your guests or your participants to know exactly what is expected of them. It will also ensure that you're limiting distractions. Having the value of co-hosts, as I talked about with having a dedicated chat moderator, is really sort of a good tip to do because it kind of breaks down the responsibilities of your session. You can have somebody to control the tech, to chat, somebody to control the chat, Q&A, the agenda. Mentioning before, having a moderator in the chat can bundle questions in large sessions to avoid duplicates. So if you have people asking the same question, somebody that's moderating the chat can actually group them in together to avoid sort of those distracting constant messages. Having a comfort check-in. So as Ben did at the beginning of this session, there's a comfort factor for people being on camera, whether, and having their mics heard, so how do you engage with your audience member if they're not comfortable, right? There's virtual reactions like emojis, you can change your background. So you want to ensure participants, have the ability to still engage even if they're not comfortable being on camera, and making sure you have, they're able to message you as the host or any of the other hosts with comments or concerns. Understanding the technical requirements of participating. So what do you do if your audience member has poor Wi-Fi, internet, they can't actively participate? As Chris mentioned, you want to provide several alternatives, options, ensure every session is recorded. So if, somebody drops out or they aren't able to participate actively, that they can come back to your session. And then giving multiple options to join, computer, mobile, tablet, phone. Everybody has access to different types of technology based on the location, their budget, time. So really understanding what method is, what devices your audience and your participants are using to engage in your session. And finally, to sum up all your engagement features, having the host really highlight the engagement features and options, indicate the time and the place for the chat, when you can raise your hand, give tips and support for optimal viewing and engagement. And, as the host, you may need to, repeat yourself, over a course of a long session. It's important that your audience continues to be engaged. But the key trait through all this is communication. Be open and transparent. Try to accommodate as much as possible. Thanks, everybody.
Hello, this one is on to me. I just want to give a few moments to just talk about accessible content, because I think we've talked a lot about how to host and how to convene and facilitate, but I think that we get questions quite frequently about the actual accessible content types and ways in which we can do this. Mindful of time, so I'm going to go through this quickly, but I'm also mindful of the options that Ira had just mentioned in terms of having a check-in. So I would just like to give everybody maybe around 30 seconds just to look away from the screen, maybe stand up, maybe go and stroke your cat or walk around for a minute. So I'm just going to give everyone like maybe 20, 30 seconds just to sort of check out for a moment, because looking at the screen can be tough for everybody. So I want to make sure we have time for questions. I just wanted to go through this quite quickly. So we're going to put this in a document we're sharing with you afterwards on these very pieces, and also on how you can use the different platforms in their own accessibility pages. So 5 key points when you're using PowerPoint, Word, and also assessing your options for external content provision, or if you're going to be doing kind of polls or icebreakers or those kinds of things. So ensure you're using large, simple, high contrast text. So that what that means is 18 point for PowerPoint, 12 point for Word, using sans serif, which are optimized for accessibility in the electronic or virtual world, so to speak, and ensuring foreground and background contrast, so that the foreground color, background contrast really well, so it's easy to see in your content. Using styles and headings to organize your content. So styles and headings are in Word, and slide title is one example in PowerPoint. So what that means is it organizes the information programmatically, so folks with screen readers are able to skip to what they need to do, and it also tells them what the slide title is and what that's going to tell them about the rest of the information. To use more than symbols to convey meaning. So text must accompany all symbols. So example, if we're going to ask somebody to go next to something in a program, or if we're going to differentiate between selections and polls. So I participated in a meeting a while ago where there were questions that were posted in a presentation on MS Teams, which then led you to an external website, and the questions correlated to symbols and icons within the external website. So anyone who maybe had difficulty understanding those symbols, or had difficulty understanding and associating their symbols with the text in the presentation, would not be able to participate at all with the actual poll itself. So being mindful of, are you using things that only use symbols or images to differentiate between different things? Alternative text for images. So we've used some images throughout this presentation. The electronic file should have alternative text, but then we have to speak through the images we're using if we can't do that, and we should be speaking through it anyway throughout the session. And then adding meaningful link text and using the accessibility checkers within your program. So Word and PowerPoint have accessibility checkers. I believe that if you're using Google Docs, there's similar things in those and other programs too. So meaningful link text is things like click here, read more, and then you highlight that, and that's where people click to go. So in any content, that's very difficult because it doesn't tell the person where they're going, which is specifically an issue for screen readers, but also anyone who just needs to know a little bit more about where they're going in that context and what happens when they click on that or interact with that link. I just put the file path for the accessibility checkers. So it's file info, check accessibility, or review and check accessibility. So these are just some points I wanted to make sure everyone had. And again, they're going to be in our resources that we share afterwards. Next slide, please. So now's the time for questions and answers. I just first of all wanted to really thank everybody for participating. I want to thank again Sarah and Nini and everyone in the President's office and elsewhere for organising this. I also just wanted to thank Ira and Chris for participating. I think what's been key here for me is that having Ira involved actually gets to the nuts and bolts of what an event looks like. He's involved every day with making sure that the events at Hart House are as accessible as possible, so that it adds a really interesting, important layer to that. And it's one of the key parts of inclusive design, is ensuring that you're collaborating with individuals who maybe have different perspectives and can add and create rich information to what you're doing. We had some questions ahead of time, so hopefully if that's okay with Sarah. I noticed there's a hand raised, which is amazing. I'm just going to go through some of the questions that were submitted ahead of time. So one of them was, what U of T's obligations for office space accessibility? That's a great question. Under the AODA, we have requirements to make sure new spaces or significantly renovated spaces are accessible. And in terms of office space, we also have obligations under the Human Rights Code to ensure that individuals with disabilities feel as though they can ask or request for accommodations. So it's best to speak through those with whoever oversees that space to see if anything can be changed or adapted. But inclusive design necessitates that we should be thinking about that from beginning to end. I think we've covered much of the other questions. There's a question around regular distance requirements for physical events. One of the resources we have will share all of that, and there's actually a checklist in the back for making sure that it needs to be accessible. So unless I've missed any of those questions, Sarah can let me know. I'd like to move on to there was a hand raised and now it's gone. I'll invite the person who had their hand raised to okay, Michelle, if you want to go ahead.
Thanks, Ben. Unmute. Sorry.
You're unmuted.
Thank you so much. That I was just tapping away in the chat too, because I have to run to another meeting as well, as I'm sure many do. But I think the only thing I was just putting in the chat is just the resource considerations in relation to this. So, you know, often the human and hard costs associated with doing this, whether it's in person or whether it's online, are not considered at the outset of planning, and people aren't sure where the resources exist either within their organization or within the university to ensure we can be as accessible as possible. And having been at planning tables with actual equity offices where they are struggling to say, how can I pay for CART or pay for ASL or pay for some of the other things that you're mentioning, it's just, I think it's not yet in the vernacular of our planning to actually budget from this at the outset. So we definitely have to improve at that a lot at Hart House, and have been talking about that with you know, Ira's leadership as part of the collaborative team he mentioned. But yeah, I think that that's often what can be hang people up later, is they've planned the whole thing and then they're like, oh shoot, and how do I make this happen?
Thank you very much. That's a great point to think about it from the beginning of planning, because we think about lots of other things from the beginning, you know, especially in physical spaces. But I think we need to include that just as much when we're talking about virtual online spaces. I noticed that Ramya, am I taking over Sarah's job as moderator? My apologies. Ramya had their hand up. Go ahead.
Hi. Yeah.
Hello.
Hi. Thank you. So my question is related to Microsoft Teams,
Yep.
but maybe also towards Zoom. We often host panels, and my question is there a way to see all panelists in a gallery at the same time? So when there's discussions back and forth, that anyone who relies on lip reading can see them all together. And that was a challenge at my last event. So I'm just planning ahead. I was just wondering what would be a good option. Under Microsoft Teams currently, I think there's only four visual speakers.
Yes. I did a little bit of investigation while I was speaking. This is Chris. Sorry, thank you. And as I mentioned earlier, my slides, a lot of these platforms are sort of reaching feature parity and making alterations very rapidly. And this is one of the things that Microsoft slated for deployment in April, but it looks like they're going to try to release a 3x3 grid very soon. So that should be an option in an upcoming release version. Just can't tell you exactly when.
Okay, that's helpful to know. And I see someone posted in the chat that it's up to 9 now.
Oh, it is up to 9? Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I haven't tested that out yet. Yep.
Okay,
Good
yeah. Maybe I need to upgrade that.
Yep. Just for those of you who are curious, who you need to use Teams on a regular basis, and maybe you installed it months ago and haven't touched it, if you click on your user icon in the upper right, there is a check for updates option in your personal menu that you can use.
Thank you for that.
No problem.
Does anyone else have any further questions today? All right, I'll take that as a no. So thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you. Oh, sorry.
Sorry, I think we actually did have one question earlier back that that came in while I was speaking. Just sort of scrolling through the chat. Sorry, this is from Laura. Do we know of any good Zoom and Teams guides for learning the platform?
I think we answered that one by we're going to post the resources. But if you feel like you want to go for it now, that's fine.
I know of the documentation from the actual sites, and that so we can share those afterwards. So those are the ones I know of. I happen to know that the Microsoft documentation is really good. Ira might actually have a better bead on the Zoom ones.
Yeah, Zoom does have a really good, robust online tutorials, whether it's through video, a lot of really great FAQs, scenario type situations. You can also book demos with some of their sales staff. Again, at the university, I mean, I'd be happy to walk anybody through it or answer anything through email, but I could provide Ben with some resources to share with everybody afterwards as well.
Great. It looks like Valerie has her hand raised. So Valerie, please unmute and ask your question.
This is less of a question and more of an informative statement. As some of you may already know, in terms of Zoom specifically, Heart House is now offering our platform for booking as part of a virtual event planning service that extends beyond simply the use of the software and also the expertise of our event coordination team to help you make what would have been a physical event a virtual event, or also just to envision a virtual event. So if that's something that you would prefer to talk about rather than booking the software yourselves, please reach out to my team because we'd be happy to help you.
Thank you, Valerie. I think people are answering various questions related to some of the platforms in the chat, but does anyone else have a further question for our panelists today?
Hi, I was just wondering if with Teams, I believe Zoom has the feature that you can keep all of the microphones muted. And I know that you can mute all participants in Teams and then people can individually unmute, but Zoom has it so that you can set it up the meeting so that all microphones are muted except for presenters. Is there an option to change that in Teams at all?
Do you mind if I take this one?
Go ahead.
Okay. To the best of my knowledge, it's something that you can do inside the interface for live events. However, as far as just a Teams meeting go, I don't believe that feature is in right away.
Okay, great. Thanks very much.
No problem.
Okay. Any further questions? All right, well, it looks like we're a little over time today, but thank you everyone for joining, and thank you, Ben, Ira, and the rest of the team for presenting to everyone this morning. We will follow up with an email to everyone sharing resources from today, and are happy to field questions back to the presenters as needed if something comes up in the next few days. So thank you everyone, and we will chat again soon for session 2 of the main event.
Thank you.